We will go ahead and start our panel now. We have some amazing people here. First off, I would like to have them introduce themselves to you guys, and we'll go ahead and start with Natalia, please.
So good morning, everyone. I'm super honored to be here today. My name is Natalia Barca, and I am a program specialist working at the Orange County Department of Education. I'm in charge of language services. Actually, we're working on a language access plan at the moment, so I love the invitation. It comes in a super timely manner. I have more than 20 years of experience working with national and international programs. I became a medical interpreter. I became a trainer for the community interpreter program, has a need from my community to be trained and receive best practices in educational field. I'm also a founding member of the American Association for Interpreters and Translators in Education, and I'm super happy to be here today.
Great,
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. Maria, excuse me.
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Mireya Perez, and I am currently the creator and host of a podcast entitled Brand the Interpreter, where I interview guests from around the world that specialize specifically in our lovely interpreting and translation world, sharing their stories. But furthermore, I did have over a decade of experience working specifically for K-12 education, leading conversations in the district with school administrators as well as surrounding administrators in different local institutions on the topic of language access and the creation of language access plans. So I continue to be an advocate for language access policies and plans as we continue to make our way into professionalizing this role.
Great, thank you. And Catherine?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. It's a pleasure for me to be in this panel with such wonderful peers here. My name is Catherine Adames, currently Director of Interpreting Operations at Effective. I am at the core a Spanish interpreter, trained medical interpreter, specialized many years ago in pediatric interpreting. And I have also been a trainer, a recruiter in our industry. I love working with customers to allow them to plan on language access, letting them know that there is an actual strategy to make it easier on their side. And working with interpreters, working with our rights, working with more knowledge as is part of our code of ethics. So very glad to be here and share just a little bit of what we're able to today.
Great, thank you guys so much. So let's go ahead and get started. So we'll go ahead and start this question off with, based on your experience, what major criteria makes a language access plan successful and efficient, in your opinion? Who would like to take that one first?
I could just share, Sean, that in my opinion, in my experience, more importantly, it definitely begins with the administrative buy-in of the topic and the services that surround language access. So we definitely want to have those crucial conversations to start off with administrators, particularly if it is a new topic for administration. So for me, in my experience, it would definitely be identifying who those key players will be and what conversations or points of discussion you are going to bring to the table.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much. In my opinion, also, we need to understand what is a language access plan as a person that is working in a school district, so I can share the message with my administrators, right? And I totally agree with Mireya, we need to get their buy-ins. So also something that I really feel that is successful is involving all the stakeholders that are requesting the services inside a school district or a county office. Explaining to them what is the plan, what does it mean. And I also feel that if we are not so knowledgeable with the topic, we should bring experts to help us and guide the process, because I could have the best intentions, but maybe I do not know everything. And we have colleagues, for example, Mireya or other colleagues that have been doing this before, and we can learn from their challenges and we can apply their successes. So I will say that to make it successful, it will be, to invite all the stakeholders and also to bring experts to the table, besides the
you.
buy-in that Mireya mentioned.
Yes, yes. Yeah, please,
Go ahead,
Catherine.
Sean. In our position, it's a little different. Of course, we must focus on all steps of the language access plan, but most importantly, I think that we need to assist on differentiating what type of assistance is needed. Do you need an interpreter? Do you need a translate? Do you need translation? So for us, it's also very important to clarify all those terms, because very often I go into a conversation and people don't differentiate. And as an interpreter also, we like to be called what we are. We're not translators, we're interpreters, and translators like to be called what they are. And so that's also very important for our industry and the access plan overall.
Thank
If
you.
you allow me, I would like to add a couple of things that I
course.
took notes here because I think they're very important. Also, in my experience, I think that it's super important to know my audience. Who are my families? What are the languages that they speak? I also think that we need to gather data. The more data we have, is going to be easier for us to develop the plan. And also, know your organization guidelines, employees guidelines. I need to know if they are bilingual employees, if they're union employees, if they're qualified, if they're certified, if they might get a stipend, because all of these pieces of information in a language access plan working in the educational system are important. And this is going to be part of the development of the document itself, right? And in my opinion, in my experience, something that is really helping me is to involve the lawyer. I know that at some point we're going to be talking about the law, right? And why we need to have this. So involving our legal department and our HR departments in the conversations, to me, is crucial. And it's very important because I don't know what they know, and they can guide me to develop a more robust document that can be shared in the future.
Thank you. I guess I would like to see, would someone be able to clarify the difference between a language access plan and a language access policy? Yes, Maria.
I'd like to take that one because I love that question. And what I can tell you is a language access plan is actually a living, breathing document. And I'm taking those words directly from someone that I heard mention that yesterday, because it's true. Your plan is basically the outline of how the services are going to be shared or given. It talks about the audience, it talks about the people involved. So, and this document is going to be something that hopefully continues to evolve and improve as you monitor the services that you're providing and your audience. The policy, as I heard it once before, is the glue. This is basically the enforcer in school districts. That you would perhaps know it more as an administrative regulation or a board policy. So this is the document that basically says it's not a choice. It's embedded in our in the practices and how we do our work for our LEP. And this is the document that we will follow. So for me, those are the major differences, both just as important documents that should live, and they should live together, but it potentially your plan is the one that is created first before the policy is potentially put in place in an educational setting.
Thank you for clarifying that. So what are some challenges that we in our industry face when it comes to working on language access plans, in particular for the educational setting?
From my seat, it's the law. People understanding that this is very important and it's a right that we all have, and it has to be implemented. The starting of this is important, is part of communication. And for us, is always going there. This is what we're basing it all out of. This is why it is important. This is why your families need it. This is why your student needs it. Not only for those who don't speak English, but also ASL people in need of ASL services. So for us, it's definitely the law.
Thank you. I appreciate that you mentioned the family members as well, because a lot of times there is a misunderstanding that the person that we're serving is maybe just the student. And that doesn't necessarily mean that. It actually applies to the student and their family members. So anyone who's involved with that child's care and education has a right to language access services in whatever modality that may be.
Yep.
Yes,
Natalia? Yeah.
yes, I would like to say that in my experience, I feel that the challenges that I have to make a language access plan successful, like Mireya mentioned, first is the plan, then it could be a guideline, and then it could be a policy. I am in the phase of developing a plan. To me, is the consistency on the decision makers that are sitting on the table when we're having these initial conversations, right, to develop the plan. Because I can have a timeline, but sometimes I cannot meet the timeline because, I need to explain the process again to the new people that are here because I want the buy-in from them. So that could be like one of my challenges, actually on developing the plan.
That's true. Consistency is kind of important, so you don't have to go back and re-educate everybody about what's involved. Maria, did you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think just in general, generally speaking, it's particularly when it comes to not necessarily having a language access coordinator, which has the oversight of this topic and the work that's involved. The main challenge would be, well, who should bring up this conversation and whose responsibility is it to ensure that these services are being provided in a meaningful way for our LEP families, the people that we're servicing. So I think the conversation is not just about being informed, but then also one of the challenges, well, who's supposed to take, such a big monster and lead it, lead the conversation. So that's definitely a challenge.
Yeah, that's a good point. You do have that need for a champion, a coordinator of sorts.
Also something,
yes, go ahead.
I'm sorry, also something that I would like to add is that
Please.
every school district has a different translation and interpretation unit structure.
It's true.
Some school districts, they have units, others don't. Others are housed in a district office. So depending on the state, right? So here in California, we have the California Department of Education, then we have a county offices that they support several school districts. And the school districts, they have, different schools that they feed into. But in other states, it's different. Like the school district operates like a county office. So what I'm seeing a little bit is that every school district, school, county office have a different type of structure. So if we all have like language access coordinators, it will be easier to define the roles and what is needed. But we don't have that. In generally speaking, in schools, it's not something that is kind of a common denominator to have this type of positions. In fact, there's a document that was shared by the American Association for Interpreters and Translators in Education about, it was a job task analysis, and a lot of our positions are like dual role positions. So it is hard to define, when somebody has to do an interpretation or a translation, and when my bilingual role come into place.
It's funny that you say this, Natalia, because when I've come to work with customers and talk about language access plans, most of them are either liaisons or just, an interpreter internally that the school district is using for these purposes. So it's very interesting that you mentioned this. And I think it's one of the main questions we should ask when this conversation starts. Do we have, like Mireya says, do we have someone in charge of this? And, take the opportunity to explain why it is important, because a language access plan involves too much. And I think it has to be very well coordinated. And if you're also interpreting and, or translating and leading a language access plan, I think it will just get a little bit confusing. So it's great that you mentioned that. And I hope for those listening in, if someone occupies one of these positions, go by Natalia and Mireya. I think they're great to allow you and guide you initiating a plan.
Thank you. Natalia, you mentioned the AAITE, which I think is a wonderful resource for everybody. I know last night they just released the codes of ethics for educational interpreters and for educational translators, which was a very historic moment for the educational field. Now, I don't think anyone had time to read these codes of ethics just yet. But can you have could you speak to how this could help school systems and school districts to maybe start developing different parts of their language access plan, maybe understanding more about interpreters and translators?
Absolutely. This was a document that it was super needed. And something that I particularly like is that they are making a differentiation between interpreters and translators, right? So I believe as school districts start learning about what is the code of ethics, what are the guidelines, what are the standards of practice, they're going to be better informed. And then therefore they can assign bilingual staff that are going to be trained and qualified to do the work, right? And this comes along with a language access guideline, and it could be a plan. But I do believe that this is going to be like a very important milestone for the professionalization of bilingual staff working as interpreters and translators, because now we have a document that has been vetted by a national organization, which and this document was vetted by people involved in the legal and the medical and the translation field professionally. So we can have something that we can say to our administrators, this is something that has been vetted nationally. We should follow this. I know that more information will come on. We can start developing maybe some handouts or examples on the standards of practice. And a lot of the scenarios that the Code of Ethics have are real cases that have happened to us in different circumstances, right? How do I interact? How do I intervene if this is a cultural situation? How do I intervene if I'm doing an over the phone interpreting? How do I intervene if we have a lot of side conversations and we are in a Zoom meeting? So I really believe that we need to start using them and sharing them with our leaders so they can know better how to delegate the work and how to train and how to get into that national standard that we all want our bilingual staff that are exercising their role as interpreters and translators to be qualified, trained, and at some point certified.
Thank you. Catherine, yeah, I'm sorry. Catherine, from a vendor standpoint, how do you guys help educational systems to really understand the roles of interpreters and translators and what you guys bring to the table when it comes to a language access plan?
That's a wonderful question. I think first we need to ask if they know the importance of this. Do you know why an interpreter is important, why a translator is important? We start with this and clarifying the points. Now I have a document that actually, and we were all in the meeting last night, that actually allows us to present the importance of this and allows us to put names to just situations that can happen in an educational encounter. I think this is a great tool, not only for us as vendors, but also for us as interpreters, getting, all of this out there. And I just lost my train of thought trying to read something here. But I think it starts with showing the importance of why we exist, why interpreters exist, why translators exist, why I need to inform a parent about their child's educational status. Why do they need to know everything about an IEP? Why do they need to know everything about a 504? Why it also has to be in paper. I want to keep this, I want to understand it, and I want to have it in my own language. Something that has always worked for me in this industry is putting myself in the parent shoes. I am also a parent. What would I like to know if it was me, my child under this circumstance? And, getting people also in that thought. And it also brings us back to our own code of ethics, what it starts with. I don't want to endanger anyone. I do not want to put anyone in a very difficult position. And that also starts with me. So I think it may start there or get us in that track.
Thank you. Mira, you had your hand up? Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to add that in addition to all of those important elements, I think that a document such as the standards of practice and our ethics for interpreters and translators in education creates I'm hoping, a wave of hope for all of those interpreters and translators in this very specific field or specialization that have been working on their own, it almost feels, in order to create some sort of standards and create some sort of processes. I think this document helps to basically let everyone know that we are here and we're in this together, and that we are a profession. And of course, I think perhaps even more importantly, be able to tell our administrators. So you remember when I once said that standards of practice would one day roll out for interpreters in education? Here's the document, and translators as well. So it's great, because what this does is now sort of puts the responsibility back on our school administrators and saying the next thing, the next goal is very likely certification. And if that's the case, then we need to get ahead of this. So I just want to mention that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Catherine.
I think Natalia had her hand raised before I did.
I'm just celebrating Mireya's
Okay.
work.
I think that these code of ethics and standards of practice open also a new brand for training, because how do you train an educational interpreter? We always went with medical because of all the terminology, vocabulary, and we would always go with legal. But there are people out there, and I know the ladies know this more than I do, that they have been doing this work for years, and they didn't really get the training that I got as a medical interpreter and other trainings that maybe we have gotten as legal interpreters. Now there's something we could base out of, something that we could actually start with, and that is just absolutely amazing. And I can't wait for that certification.
I agree. Certification is definitely something that we need in every field to validate a person's skills and abilities. Thank you. So let's move on to some more questions here. Can you share with the audience a few ideas of how an educational institution can make sure that its language access plan and the measures that are within it meet all the legal requirements? And I think we touched on it a little bit. Natalia, did you want to take that?
Yes, sure. So actually the Orange County Department of Education here in California, we are working on developing a language access plan. And my hope is to have some guidelines. And like Mireya said, at some point, maybe this can become something that the organization already adopts, right? So in our case, it's a little bit different because we have a board of education, and also we are an organization that we have internal schools that we provide services for deaf of hard of hearing students, and also different programs like for students that they will prefer to do online learning and homeschool. So I do believe that part of the success is to involve our legal department and our HR department. And the reason why I'm saying this is because I'm crafting now our first draft of the document itself. And what I'm facing is that some of the words that I'm using are not aligned with our employees' guidelines, right? And what the union said, if a bilingual employee is going to be receiving a stipend for ABC, so I have to start using the same legal language into this document. And we're seeing some things that maybe we can update in the future, or maybe we can word them differently. So for example, when I say I have a qualified bilingual employee, or I have a trained bilingual employee, maybe the words qualified and trained are not used on our union agreements. So it will be good to revise them, and then for consistency, use the same type of word. But I will have never known this if I did not involve our legal department and our lawyers into the conversation. So that is something that it gives me a peace of mind, because having this area covered by an expert is ensuring me that we are doing the right thing according to what legal mandate, what federal mandate says.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes, Mireya.
I would encourage anyone that is part of the language access service, whether that is the interpreter translator or educational support staff and the administrators, to get familiar with the federal guiding documents that are made available publicly on specifically to support individuals or federal programs or institutions to create language access plans. These guiding documents are there specifically to support our institutions in just beginning the process, getting a basic understanding. If someone is coming to you as a school administrator and saying, we need a plan, we need support, we need help. Language access plan is needed. We need some sort of guidance. Consider reviewing these documents so that you're not only getting familiar with the terminology, as Natalia was just mentioning, but also what it all involves. Because if you're not familiar with the term language access, you may not even be familiar that there's language access laws that are governing this specific service, and that's very likely that our institutions, our educational institutions, are out of compliance with a lot of these elements that are super important for a language access plan. So get familiar with these documents. Executive Order 13166 is another very important document that helps guide administrators in creating these processes and begin to have these conversations. So get familiar with these documents, get familiar with the terminology, and then be open to a fruitful conversation.
There are two things these ladies mentioned, and I think Natalia mentioned this sometime a few minutes ago. There's sometimes not a language coordinator, someone that has to deal with the language access plan, and then is there a compliance department? These two have to work together, because if we don't understand compliance, then why is a language access plan important? So.
Thank you. I think what we've been talking about definitely shows that it's a team effort. One person could not do it themselves. And if you don't have a language access coordinator, somebody who can kind of take the ball and make sure things are progressing, it can be quite challenging. But you're gonna need your vendors, your providers, you're gonna need your local staff, you're gonna need your compliance team, your legal team, you're gonna need your administrators, you're also your educational support staff as well. It's gonna require that team effort. Let's see here. So for us to have a successful language access plan, does that mean that we have to have an entire team of just staff interpreters, or do we have just only vendors? Can you guys kind of talk to me about what would be an ideal look for a school district or an educational system?
Yeah, so I can speak from my opinion and what I have learned in the field nationally. Every school district is different, right? So, and every language access coordinator works in a different way depending on the resources. So in our experience, we do have a small team of in-house interpreters/translators, which their position is not an interpreter translator, right? So like we were mentioning before, the job task analysis document. However, if we have internal staff, we can create consistency. They learn all the technical terminology. They can serve the families, in the same way. We also have on-call staff, which it means that they're at will employees. So they will come and they will do certain hours for us. And that is working perfectly. At the same time, I highly recommend that we should be partners with our language services providers, because we cannot fulfill all the languages. In Orange County, the threshold languages are Arabic, Chinese, English, Farsi, Korean, Spanish, and Vietnamese, right? And maybe I cannot fund a full-time employee in Farsi or a full-time employee in Vietnamese. So depending on the area that I am located, maybe the community is more Vietnamese families, and maybe the other community is more Korean families. So for that, I can justify a full-time position. However, if I partner with language services providers, you can give us the service for all these other exotic languages that may come, right? So I know that there's out there a lot of information and a lot of support from language services providers. We can make phone calls. You can also send us interpreters online. And I really feel that this is a nice partnership. We cannot do everything on our own. Also, we have a lot of tools. If you're going to be talking about translations, we have a lot of CAD tools that can help us, create term bases and consistency again for documents. But I truly believe that we have to all work together. So in our case, we have internal staff. We have at will staff, which is, short-term employees that they support us in our daily work. And also we work with language services providers.
Thank you. And just to
Yeah.
clarify, CAT tools is a computer assisted translation to standardize things for those of you who may be watching. Catherine, did you have something you'd like to add to that?
Yes, just adding to what Natalia was saying, for us, what we've seen is that it will also depend on the need. There are definitely school districts that do not have, parents that need the assistance or students that actually need the assistance. But we also have school districts that need all. And so they have their own staff. They're fine. They have a few, but when there is parent-teacher meeting, they do not, they cannot come in and fulfill all the needs. So you will need a language service provider to assist you. And then there are other ways that we can communicate. We have on-site interpreting. We have over-the-phone interpreting. And then we also have video remote interpreting and all the other types of services for the ASL need and other types of needs as well. So I think it's a partnership, and we have to go out there and, present it as a partnership.
I appreciate you saying that because I used to be a staff interpreter and a contract interpreter for the educational system. And whenever it was one of my students, when we were doing their IEPs, I would be involved in the IEP meeting. So we would have to bring in an outside contractor to interpret the meeting for the deaf family members or for the student that was present for those IEP meetings. So I appreciate that. Now, sometimes, yes, Maria, would you
Sorry,
like to add
Sean.
to that? Yeah, go ahead.
No, I do. I would like to add, because I think it's important that we consider this, the fact that even though taking into consideration that every school district is very unique, we want to make sure that we're thinking that it should be and not or when it comes to providing these services. So absolutely, we should be thinking about an internal team and an external team. So remember that guiding document that I mentioned earlier, that specific document that I have in mind that really has a great way for you to be able to follow what a language access plan should look like. By the way, it's called Language Access Assessment and Planning Tool for federally conducted and federally assisted programs. And in it, it has a beautiful little diagram that basically gives you the 6 elements to a language access plan. And one of those elements is assessing the language needs of your community. So before you decide on one way or the other, make sure that we are assessing, Natalia said it earlier, that data piece. So that data is not just for reporting purposes to the state, it also will inform us and how we're able to put something as robust as a language access plan to meaningfully service our linguistically diverse communities. We have to do this in the way that we are understanding our audience, like Natalia said. And in order to understand our audience, we have to know who it is we are servicing first. So before we even determine, even making a call to the nearest language service provider, what are those languages that we're looking for? And can this language service provider support us in those very specific languages that we need? So I think just, getting that overall picture or overview of who it is we're servicing before we're even making those decisions is very important.
Thank you. Yeah, you can't make decisions without data, right? You got to know what you're working with in your population. I know for us in healthcare, we actually use some of the data that the school systems collect because they tend to have more accurate data about who's in your area, because the census is only done every 10 years or so. And the census does not keep account of individuals that use sign language. So I have no idea how many people use sign language. They're always estimates. So, but using the school system data, you can kind of triangulate who's in your area and what your patient population is. So I appreciate that. The more data, the better for everybody. Now, some people feel like they are compliant with, and they feel like they have a language access plan by saying, here's person A, they're bilingual and they're dual role. We use them to interpret as needed, but sometimes no one actually assessed that person, or maybe this person's not certified, or this person has other things. Are they still compliant, or how can we address that?
So I love that question. because so what I will suggest, we need to have language proficiency tests for all these bilingual employees, because not because I speak Spanish means that I can be a good interpreter. I may not have the technical terminology, right? So the first, and when I'm saying about a language proficiency test, I'm not mentioning the one that we create. I'm mentioning something that has been recognized by a third party, something that, that follows what bilingual teaching follows, what, educational institutions use. So depending on the vendor or the criteria, I will highly suggest, to have a test like that. And then in school districts, normally we are covered by the school. So if something common happens, it's more likely that the school will be liable. However, that's what we need trained staff to understand, that if I do not understand a word, if I don't know a word, what is going to be my strategies to intervene, to start the meeting? And we always talk about communicate autonomy, right? Community autonomy. I am responsible of my own words. Parents are responsible of their own words. So if I, as an interpreter, do not understand a word, if I don't know the meaning of something, I can easily say, as an interpreter, can you please explain term ABC with me? And I render that in both languages. So I believe that having trained staff is super important, and it goes beyond a language assessment, depending on the level of proficiency the person may have. So you're identified that I am super proficient. I can be between 8, 9, and 10. I'm a native speaker. I know perfect terminology in both languages. So now we need to train staff, right? And what are those communicate autonomy instances that you need to identify if a word or a problem arises? So that is, to me, the importance of having everybody that is going to be providing interpretation for students and families to be trained and knowledgeable about, like Mireya was mentioning, the laws, the compliance frameworks, not just say yes because, I just want to do it, say yes, but with some knowledge of what this entails and what this means.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to add to that?
I could actually.
Go ahead.
I could always talk about this on and on. The short answer to that is it's no. We are so out of compliance if we're thinking that our bilingual educational staff is good enough in order to provide adequate services. And I think that when we get familiar with the texts that are in these guiding documents, and we are involved enough in the conversations about language access, there's a key phrase there that potentially makes the difference in how we approach such a monstrous task, right, of providing these services. And that phrase is meaningful access to programs and services. And that word meaningful really is the word that should be guiding the work that is involved behind creating policies and procedures. Earlier, my fellow panel members did say that it involves a team, right? This is a team effort, and it starts with not just the team of the decision makers, but also the individuals that are going to support in the beginning the creation or changes of some of these policies in the district. I will give you an example of what I mean. For instance, human resources. If we're working with hiring bilingual staff, what are those requirements? Are we requiring and assessing bilingualism of an individual? That is the ability for just direct communication with our families? Or are we truly assessing interpreting ability? It's very likely that HR, you ask them that question for many school districts. I'm not saying all, because there are some great programs and policies out there in school districts, but potentially for many school districts, the response is, I didn't know there was a difference. And so that is a great example of how we're able to partner when you have someone that understands what meaningful language access is for our families, beginning with identifying who our team is going to be and how we can begin creating changes in our policies, and our plans, so that we are providing an appropriate service that is much more than a bilingual individual at the front desk.
The vetting process What is, like the ladies were mentioning, what is the vetting process? Okay, I speak English, and this is what I always share. I understand they speak English. I've had the opportunity to interpret as a child. I spoke English, but I didn't manage the terminology. I spoke English, but I didn't know when to pause. I didn't know when to tell someone that they were giving me too much information, when all of this information was as important as the short information that I was trying to provide. So there is a basic training that needs to happen if you're going to use someone that you hired also as an interpreter. Note-taking skills, memory retention, it goes way beyond just the language. And I know this goes with what Mireya and Natalia were saying. It goes way beyond this. And not everyone that speaks English or that speaks English and French has the ability to interpret, has the ability to translate. And if you are going to go ahead and hire someone because they speak English, go ahead and also give them the opportunity to be trained. I hired you. I think you speak Spanish wonderfully. You manage vocabulary, and I would like to give you these resources for training. There are a lot of free trainings out there. It helped me when I first started this many, many years ago. So go ahead and allow them to investigate what is, you know, what goes beyond, what goes behind interpreting. Provide them other resources. If it's an IEP interpreting session that they're going to do, provide them with material that will allow them to manage this vocabulary. Talk to them about the students some way. There is HIPAA, there are privacy laws. Does the person know that there are privacy laws? A big example that I read in one of my trainings was, I am part of a community. If I were to go interpret at my child's school, I would know many of those parents and many of those students. Does the parent know that if their child is under an IEP, I need to keep that private, even if I'm part of your community? When you hire someone, do they know that it has to be private? This is against the law. And so if you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the training, it's very easy for you to violate these regulations. So absolutely out of compliance, unless all of the what the ladies mentioned and I just mentioned comes with it.
Yes, and I
Thank you.
only want to wrap up. That is why it is so important to have a language access plan guideline in place, because everything will be there, and it will be easier for us, you know, to share this with our leaders.
Well said. Thank you very much. So what advice could you give to those that are just starting to work on their language access plans? Like, I know the Department of Education is going to release a new language access plan next year. They haven't released it yet, but the current administration has mandated that each department have an updated language access plan, and several have released it, which is great. But the Department of Education one is a little bit outdated, but they're going to update it next year. How can people who are just starting out get this going?
Well, I would like to start, and then I think Mireya has more content to it. So what the
Please.
advice that I would like to share is, first, learn on your own, be informed what it is, what it entails, what it takes, what are the steps, what are the principles, and then talk to people that are experts in the fields, right? That's the way I started. That's the way I did it. I did my homework. I did my research. I tried to learn on my own. There were a lot of things that I did not understood. And then I found out, you know, that other school districts were doing it. And then I found out that other colleagues were doing it. You know, so we brainstormed, we went back and forth, talking to people that already done it before. What were your best practices? The challenge that you have, what suggestion would you give me? Would you like to partner with us? Can we do this together? So that's the advice that I would tell, you know, somebody that wants to start. I'm talking about my educational colleagues, people that are working in the educational system. But at the same time, I truly believe that partners like language services providers are super important in the equation, because I have learned so much from my language services providers. I did not know what was dubbing. I did not know, you know, when people wanted to re-record a video. I did not know if somebody speaks in English and then you want the interpretation in Spanish after the event, what are the steps you need to do, right? At the beginning, they gave us a bunch of documents and it was audios, and we thought that we could do it. And it took us like 2 weeks, when if you send all of this to a company, it can take you a couple of hours. So I truly believe that partnership, it's important. And I know, Mireya, you have more to this, but that will be my advice to somebody that wants to start. educate yourself, do your research, do your homework, try to connect and network with people that have done it before, and find experts that are going to help you in the journey.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would add exactly, piggybacking off of that last comment is you are not alone. 10 years ago, when I started in the journey, I felt alone. When I wanted to know how language access could support, selfishly, I'm going to admit, I was thinking about how could it support us, the interpreters and translators, in the school district. I wasn't so much thinking, don't come after me for that, for this, but about the LEP families, because I knew we were doing the best that we could. I was looking for ways to support us, the interpreters and translators. Fast forward 10 years later, now there is more support than ever. I want to acknowledge somebody that asked a question or a comment about Washington State's, their language access policy that was just passed, law, I think it was last year. Very specific to K through 12 educational institutions. And everything that we're talking about, standards of practice, requirements for the individuals that will be supporting your linguistically diverse communities, all of that is outlined in papers or documents or laws such as that. And so it's very important that we're out there, not just doing our homework, but making connections, because you're not alone, not anymore. And now we've got associations such as AITE that is supporting the interpreter and translator and creating, standards of practice for us so that we know not only how, but being able to acknowledge that this is a profession and that we're only working harder and harder to get our recognition. So make those connections and don't be afraid to reach out. There are definitely plenty of people that are willing to support language access policies in education.
Lastly, I don't have anything else to add besides what the lady said, but lastly, I know there are groups of language access professionals, and they share their best practices. That is a great way to start. Going online, I think it's the first thing to do. There is a lot of information. I know CMS has a very thorough process for language access, and hey, it's healthcare and education, healthcare. So start the research, as the lady said. But there are a lot of groups. LinkedIn is there. If you search for language access, you have a lot of professionals that pop up. There are a lot of videos that are also shared. So that's the way to start research.
That's great. Thank you, guys. So we do have another question. For those of you who have or are close to finishing your own language access plans, how are you determining what sort of situations would be appropriate for a bilingual employee versus calling in a professional interpreter? And where do you draw the line?
I want to start by saying this. There are situations that are an emergency. If you have someone who is a bilingual staff, you can use them for an emergency. If it's something a little bit more serious that you may have more time to go and find an interpreter or translator, go ahead and do so. But I think we have also discussed training. Does this person have the training needed for whatever situation is going on in the school? This is when you draw the line. And also, the vetting process. HR has to know what qualifications their employees have, and we can start from there. I'll pass it on to the ladies.
Yes, I do want to echo what Catherine said. Training. That will be my key word, right? Like you mentioned, we have an emergency. My students come first. I don't ever want a family to feel that we are not providing the service because, we could not provide a trained, qualified, certified interpreter translator. So I believe that we need to provide training to bilingual staff that are exercising the role of an interpreter. And also we are defining complexity of meetings, right? What is something that you can do at the front office? What type of information you can share? And then identify inside the organization who are the trained staff that have been already had at least a 40-hour minimum training, that you know that they can make an informed decision if something arises. So training, I go back with the training, and that's the fine line. And like we all have been talking today about our new code of ethics that has been released, I think, training staff in that area is super important. And another thing that I will say too, even if my school district is not training me, or even if we do not have the budget to do this, I can do it on my own, right? I pay for my own trainings. I pay for my own professional development, because that is only something that's going to benefit me. Of course, it will benefit the organization and the students and the families. But if I want to professionalize my craft, I need to find all those resources out there so I can make a better and more informed decision. For example, if I have a lawyer that is going to be talking about an expulsion hearing, I do know that I'm not a legal interpreter. However, I can find the resources to say, we have this amazing language service provider that they provide the best certified language legal interpreter. So, we can connect with them. That would be my recommendation.
And I think also we want to consider going back to the topic of who's on the team, or who are the people that you are going to be speaking with internally about the creation of these policies. If your school district has a union, that is definitely something that you or someone that you want to be working closely with, particularly if it involves classified staff. The recommendations or conversations could be had around, well, how long is the individual being taken away from their regular role, right? That might be a question that might come up. And if we're talking about a meeting that is 15 minutes or longer, particularly if it's a specialized meeting or a legal meeting, we're talking IEPs, 504s, anything that's going to last longer than 15 minutes potentially, now it's affecting the regular job of this individual, then potentially that might be where you want to draw the line, because it's impacting their regular role. If it's an add-on, if interpreting is an add-on. So this is why it's so important that we're not working in silos when it comes to creating these policies, that we're working alongside other departments, other district departments, including our union members, so that we're able to listen to their concerns and also be able to address them and outline them in our policies.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys hitting that, because a lot of times with dual role employees, there's this issue that comes up where you can't be an interpreter and do your job at the same time. You can only be one or the other. And that's definitely things that do come up. And that's why we tend to stay away from dual role when it comes to interpreting in healthcare. There are many places that do that, which is fine. We just haven't found that personally to be very effective, because you can't be a nurse and be an interpreter, because being a nurse has different codes of ethics than being an interpreter does, and they conflict with each other, and that's an issue that comes up. Thank you, guys. We have another question. Someone was asking about the federal government's working on a very outdated Eurocentric language list. Is there a way to get work to get more languages and dialects added to this list? Yes.
I very excitedly raise my hand, because yes, there is a way. You can start by getting involved with your associations in advocating for such changes at that level. So there is no one way directly to be able to send that information over to our government necessarily, right, to make those changes quickly. It is I'm certain a long process, but by joining forces with associations such as the AAITE, you're able to be part of committees that are addressing advocacy about these topics in a group as a whole. So consider joining an association. That was a shameless plug in there.
No, I think it was appropriate, because these organizations are not exclusive. They do want it to be multidisciplinary, right? Because we want multiple stakeholders involved to make sure that these policies and codes of ethics and standards of practice are all very clear, and they impact everyone equally. So we have another question here just before we wrap up. Do you have annual competencies for educational interpreters that can be done annually to ensure quality?
That is a great question. So I'm just going to speak for what is happening in Orange County Department of Education. So we are trying to implement an interpreter's feedback, right? It's not easy, but we are trying to implement a system where we can provide feedback to know if we are receiving all the documents, if we are receiving, information ahead of time. But at the same time, we want to create a culture where it is okay to give a feedback to the interpreter, right? So I just went to a class and a lesson about, maybe today I'm an amazing interpreter and I feel that I did an amazing job. And maybe tomorrow with the same student in the same family, it went bad. Maybe I did not have a good night's sleep. Maybe I had a personal situation. Maybe I was rushing in the morning. So not all assignments will be successful, but if I can measure the way I provide my interpretation, I can be better, right? So there's a lot of tools and strategies that I know that other people and other experts in the field are trying to develop. And so we're trying to implement it. It's not easy, but like we have mentioned again, right? Data and data and data. And why data is so important, right? Data is important because then I can get more training, because then I can get more staff. Then, we can justify the reasoning, but that's something that I would love to see, but it's new. So we are implementing that like a new culture. And, change is hard, but little by little, now that we have codes of ethics and standards of practices, I believe that more people are going to be excited to start working on these new practices.
As LSPs, I think we're responsible to make sure that our interpreters, especially in this field, are up to date with changes, up to date with the law, up to date with vocabulary and everything that's going on. And I think the world is changing too fast. And so we have to be behind that. We have to be right there with it. And so as LSPs, we are responsible to share with our interpreters. And something that I, as an interpreter, am also doing is communicating to people when changes come up. Like yesterday, we attended this wonderful meeting. The first thing I said, we need to download and share. This is part of also training. It doesn't have to be annually, and I think we will have it, especially after these code of ethics and standards of practice were put in paper. But for right now, it's update as you can. Try to have a trend. Try to have open communication with your interpreters. We recently had a meeting with on-site interpreters for one of our school districts in which they exposed their concerns. They asked questions and we were able to respond. Do we want to have this as a practice? Yes, we do. And I think that the best feedback that we can get as to what is going on is our interpreters. They are in the field. They are the people that are going to bring in much information for us. So I think we should soon implement the training. Those of you working closely with the American Association for Interpreters in Education, please pass that on. And I think we should implement it as LSPs as well.
Great. Well, guys, that's our time. We really thank you guys so much. This was a wonderful panel. I really enjoyed the discussion we've had so far. And it seems like several people also responded that they did as well. So I believe we have another survey that we want to just see how we can better serve you guys for future panels like this. And I believe our team will release that now. Thank you. So if you guys don't mind filling this survey out before you leave, and we thank everybody for participating today.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, interpreters.
Are we still online?
Yeah, so
Yes.
far.
Let me freeze.
I think we still have a few attendees.
Stefan, do you want us to hop off now?
Yes, please. Yeah, I think that's
Hi,
it.
Alex.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I think you can leave the meeting. Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll stop the webinar shortly.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
to
It
see
was
you
a
guys.
Thank you very
pleasure to
much.
me.
It's good. Good to see you.
Thank you guys.
Great
Have a good one.
conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.